Hi. We're back in Senate Judiciary to hear from our Attorney General about S12, and the floor is yours.
All right, well, it's great to be here. I was going to provide an overview of my office. Have you already received that?
Also that as well.
No, okay, yeah, I'll do that. And some of it's a refresher, but I learned running for office that not everybody knows. That's understatement. Not everybody knows what the Attorney General does, so I always take the opportunity to kind of explain what our role is. We are the lawyer to the state in a nutshell, and the Attorney General is given the power to sue on behalf of the state. When the state is sued, we defend in court. And our office is, compared to other elected, it's pretty large. It's 150 people. We have 100 lawyers. We have more lawyers than any of the law firms in Vermont, so we like to kind of joke that we're the largest law firm, but we're not really. And we have agency clients we serve as well. So in addition to the Attorney General's prerogative suing, we also represent in court and matters the Agency of Transportation, taxes, AHS, and the list goes on. We have lots of clients we support. We also, of course, come over here and testify and provide advice and support to the legislature. You have your own legislative counsel who are your lawyers. This is a little different, but we work really closely with legislative counsel. First of all, they're the experts on what they do, and we defer to them on drafting bills, which they're so good at. But we often will collaborate and we work really well together. They're obviously great. One of our, I would say, the most common reason we are in here is due to our criminal profile. We have a criminal division. In a criminal division, we basically have two units. One is called Medicaid fraud. It is largely funded by the federal government. Hopefully that goes well this week. A little bit bumpy, but we do get a federal grant from the federal government to fund those positions. And that is work that's done when someone is using, a classic example is a caretaker or a long-term care facility is abusing patients. They're doing, they're using money in a way that is not, that is illegal. And Medicaid fraud unit will do that criminal work. We also have our regular criminal unit. In that, we have a statewide purview and we prioritize the most violent crimes, homicide, sexual assault, and especially child sexual abuse. And that's because we have in our office a little law enforcement agency called ICAC, the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. In that unit, we have the investigators and also two canines. And when if you ever hear testimony from the director of that work, that law enforcement agency, ICAC, it's Matt Raymond, and he is the dad to one of the dogs. So he will bring the dog with him. So good to see Mojo. He's amazing. They are incredible tools for the work that they do. So I'm trying to think of other issues that I wanted to make sure I covered in terms of an overview. I always flag this for representatives and senators. We have a consumer assistance program. Every state has one of those. Ours is located at the University of Vermont, which is extremely cool. And the reason why I'm flagging that is because we handle consumer issues, but a huge percentage of the calls and contacts that we get are actually not consumer issues. It's people who need help navigating government. They are very, very good at that. So if you ever have a constituent who has a problem and you just are overwhelmed and don't even know where to start, please feel free to reach out to Todd or me or the Consumer Assistance Program directly or make that referral, because they are great at helping people navigate government. And also if they have a consumer issue, of course, we handle over 10,000 contacts every year with consumers and others in that office. So just keep that in mind as a sort of safety valve. If you don't know where to get help for a constituent, the Consumer Assistance Program in my office is always a good stuff. So I always want to flag that. Before I move on to stealing, does anyone have any questions about my office?
I will just say I reached out to Todd this morning for the Consumer Assistance Program for a constituent. It's very helpful. Not just saying that because he's sitting. Yes, yeah.
No, they're absolutely great. And I'll tell you, when I go to groups and I say, has anyone here ever called the Attorney General's office for a consumer complaint or the Consumer Assistance Program? And no one has ever not raised their hand. And people, oh yeah, I had a scam. I got this. I had a home improvement issue, whatever it is. We also do a lot of education from the Consumer Assistance Program. So if you have, someone in your community who feels like they would enjoy a scam talk or, another issue of consumer in the consumer space, Propane is a huge, this time of year, a huge thing I flagged for legislators because we have a very robust statute related to propane. So if one of your constituents, propane gets cut off, call the consumer assistance program right away and we can help get them back on track. So good. I'm glad that you have had a good experience.
I guess my question, and it is due to some concerns a couple of constituents have raised, is your role in discrimination cases, whether that be employment or housing.
We do employment cases. Housing is the Human Rights Commission. Yeah, our civil rights unit is almost all of what they do is employment discrimination. That's the kind of purview. And we do have contracts with the Equal Employment Opportunity Office. So I'm monitoring that situation closely as well. So yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. Why don't I talk about sealing? Just a little background. Sealing is something that we've been working on for a number of years since before I was Attorney General. Before I was Attorney General, I worked in the Attorney General's office. I was the Chief of Staff, and in that role, I supervised the work that we did hosting expungement clinics where we would go into a county, team up with the state's attorney in that county, and we would have a one-day clinic to help people. During the pandemic, we actually did that online, and now we kind of do a bit of a hybrid. We sort of mastered how to help people. We try to have one every other month, except during the legislative session because Todd and I are too busy coming over here and helping. So we don't do it during this time frame. We just had one in December in Franklin County. With State Attorney Brian Kronigfeld in St. Albans. It was great. And so a lot of my passion for this issue comes from that experience of helping so many people, and also helping people because there are people who would have things on their record that they couldn't seal, they couldn't expunge. And this committee was really helpful in 2022. We had it was a loophole where you could get your DUI charge sealed after 10 years had passed and a certain number of things, but you couldn't the lesser crime of negligent operation, which often someone would be charged with a DUI and then they would plead down to negligent operation and it would be on their record forever. Only they had done a DUI. It was just an oversight, and this committee just kind of tacked it onto the miscellaneous judiciary bill in 2022, and now that's an option. And it's like it feels so good whenever that comes in. I'm like, this is awesome. We saw this and we all fixed it, and I'm grateful for that. But the truth is we have a little bit of a clunky system. And so for years, we've been trying to move to a system where we have purely sealing instead of having expungement for the lowest level crimes. And then you go into a sealing where the person by law can say, I don't have a criminal record. It's what's called a legal fiction. Where they can say that, and they do have a record, but only a very few number of people can access it. So it's sealed. The idea behind this is that the research shows someone who commits a crime after a certain number of years is no more likely to commit a crime as a person who never committed a crime. And so we were basically requiring people to wear a scarlet letter for the rest of their lives for no reason. And the bottom line, it was holding them back from not like moving on with their lives. It's a kind of colloquial way of saying it, but the truth is it was preventing them from achieving, getting a job. And I hear this every clinic we do. I hear, people it's a different person who committed these, and now they just want to go to their kid's field trip. And the better job thing comes up a lot. People who literally are unable, they're not qualified, or they're afraid, that they will fail a background check. Something that I've experienced in these, I find very moving, is people will come and, we're there, we have our printer, and we have a whole team of people like helping, and it's we're kind of ready for anything to want to be able to help people and move on because there's so many people who come through the door. And some people will come and we'll be in some like dusty conference room, and they will literally be in a suit because they're taking it so seriously. This is this thing that's been hanging over their head, and it's really, really moving. But I do want to share with you one particular story of that happened in October. We had an expungement clinic, and a man came on his lunch break, I presume, and he was in the construction trade. He was like fully in his gear because he needed help. And my heart broke. This man had been sober for 20 years, and he had a record that had been under 25. And then he had one charge that was of the week after his 25th birthday. the ceiling regime right now, you can have, there's juvenile ceiling law that we aren't really advocating to change. And that would require, that allows you to seal a record when you're under 25. And because of that, and it was his third DUI, which you can only do one DUI right now. And here was this man who was, I could see he was hardworking because he was outfitted in his hardworking uniform. And we had that 20 years, like what an accomplishment for someone who struggled with, alcohol or drugs, I'm not sure, to be sober for that long. And I just felt like you're the kind of person we want to be supporting so that you can move on with your life. And just giving that as an example, I found that to be really powerful. Well, the truth is I see those people every single clinic that we do. So my interest comes from that experience and seeing and meeting with these many people. At this point, I'm sure I've helped a couple hundred people get their records sealed or expunged. And I will tell you, my office, everyone at some point has been involved, and it's very powerful. And I'm sure they would say the same thing. I'm sure if Todd were sitting here, he would be saying the same exact thing. So we have been trying to work with this committee and with the House, the administration, with state's attorneys to try to find like what's the sweet spot. It's complicated. And right now, our law really focuses on the lowest level crimes and misdemeanors largely, and then some felonies. But the sealing regime that we would like to move to would sweep in more crimes, do away with expungement, so there would only be sealing. And ideally, we would move towards an automatic sealing regime, because right now what happens is someone has to come and go through a process, and the court is the one who gets to decide. So they're involved and their time is being spent, looking at an application, a petition for sealing. And, if we could just acknowledge at some point, things should just be sealed rather than expunged, rather than just to exist forever. So that would be ideal as well. All these conversations we've had before, those in this committee have had them before. This is not new news. But we really are at the point where I think that we would like to come to some compromises with folks so that we can move on. And this is just, the years keep ticking away, and there's still people who have their records and they're not sealed. And I really would like to help these people. So that's why we're here. I know that we can talk more specifically about the details of the bill, if that's helpful. I don't know. I was not able to watch this morning. I believe you had other testimony on the bill specifically. So I don't know if you just want to move to questions, or if there's something specific from our office that you'd like us to say or address.
Committee, anything, the initial questions?
Or if there's certain areas where you're like, this one's kind of a hot spot.
Yeah.
Where do you guys fall
Yeah,
on it?
There are a few, I mean, I'd like to hear the specifics from your end as well, if you have anything with the draft that we have in front of us. Some of the questions that I think we're going to be grappling with is who can have access to records after a certain length of time. We've had this conversation about super sealing as a way of replacing expungement. And I think that, one of the ideas that I have is, right now law enforcement can access sealed records. And this proposal about super sealing is making it so that no one can access the records except the defendant after 10 years. And instead of doing that, I think the idea is to move to a system in which, in order to avoid the potential prejudice that may happen on the roadside, to allow law enforcement to access those records after 10 years, but they have to go through the state's attorney, who can file a motion with the court to gain access to the records. That way you're kind of avoiding that, roadside issue. And, it could be used though in cases that justify it, such as resolving a cold case or a massive conspiracy investigation or something. So I don't know if my point was clearly articulated, but that's one of the initial things I think we're going to be tackling.
At this point in the session, and with this, really by any of, and with this bill, we're just in a position of a compromise mode. And so I think there's a lot of, generally speaking, there's the S12 looks good. You know, the governor has a proposal that looks good. I mean, you're really in the spirit of knowing we're 95% of the way there. And what's happened in the past, for the past like 3 sessions, maybe, is that last 5% is keeping us from passing that bill. And we just want to come and say, we would love to be able to pass a bill, because I see it every couple months. I see people we can't help because of this. And I would just love for us to get to a point where those folks, you know, meanwhile, I'm thinking, you know, that the person who told me in 2022 that they couldn't get their record sealed, now their kid that needed a field trip chaperone, now they're in high school and don't even need a chaperone. And like, it breaks my heart. I want to be able to move ahead. So I can't even be specific, because I feel like at this point, I want to drill down on what are the differences and try to bring us together so that we can pass a bill that the governor will sign and can help these folks move on with their lives.
I think, you know, one of the other areas also is, well, I do think that 10-year super ceiling thing, I think that's part of the 5%. I think there was also the idea about licensing and OPR that was brought up. That was a big piece of contention last year. I believe there is general consensus that we're not opening that floodgate. It's not, you know, there aren't exceptions now, and we're not planning to change that, at least at this moment.
Yeah.
So that is going to remain untouched. So that's another point. Senator Bohosky, did you have a question?
I got a comment. And that is, and this is perhaps for your benefit, but also I think for the committee's benefit, I do think there are still some spaces where that sort of super ceiling would make sense. For example, something that's no longer a crime, something that if I did something 10 years, let's use cannabis.
That's expungible now.
Right, but I don't think we should move that to a space where anyone has access to it, because it's no longer a crime. If I did the same thing today as I did 10 years ago.
In a sealing regime where you're not getting rid of, I mean, I can't even remember, like right now, dismissed cases are expungible.
Yeah.
So that's another in the category. So we have to work out that, like,
Yeah.
are you really saying stealing, or it's a totally different category. I always think about, you know, the famous movie that was shown in my evidence class in law school, My Cousin Vinny. If you haven't seen My Cousin Vinny, you got to see it. But you know, classic. I mean, that is an extreme example. That's not normally what happens with a dismissed case. But that one to me is in that same category. So that's a good point. So okay, so we've identified the roadside stop, you know, challenge, and this challenge of there's certain categories where it's like, really, should that be sealable? And the beauty with sealing is the efficiency of it, and the kind of expenses saved and the time saved by having a streamlined system, which the judiciary, I don't know if they testified already, but they always talk about that. And it's true. I mean, it is really clunky to have it be the way it is now. And that is part of why we do these clinics. It's so complicated. We think that a lawyer with expertise is the most helpful. I do, if I'm remembering correctly, but I might not be, the concept of super sealing was a concept that is more recent. There was a bill that passed the House in 2022 that I don't think had super sealing. I mean, the body has changed so much since then, but I'm wondering if we can, you know, just talk about with others, come up with ideas, Todd and I, knowing that these are the kind of sticking points. Maybe we can kind of talk to our friends and other stakeholders just to see, like, where can we find a compromise so that we can move this ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we'll find out about hopefully next week is from the Crime Information Center as to what they can and can't do with their current programming and software systems, you know, regarding data and conviction information from 10 years prior. And so that's going to be one potential speed bump, depending on what the new law last 2 weeks.
Okay.
That's another area, but yeah.
I would just, all the state's attorneys do expungements and sealings all the time because they often will be the ones to, you know, sign off on it. So they are experts in this. I offer myself as someone who personally has helped this folks expunge or seal their records and has had to work, like, roll up my sleeves and figure out what the statutes mean and how they work together. And if we can be helpful in that respect, please let us know. We'll come back. But it sounds to me like we're at that point where it's just like, how can we resolve these sticking points so that we can there's so much agreement has already been made largely, in conversations over the years. So why don't Todd and I can continue to do our work and work with others. We'll look for the testimony from the Crime Victims Information Center, to help inform that work, and that we can either circle back, we'll come back to see if there's, a proposal that we can have.
I know you've done a bunch of expungement clinics as have some of our state's attorneys, which is just incredible. And what I'm wondering is, if you can think of anyone who's benefited from that might want to come in and testify as to why this is important.
I know, I thought about that, and we do have some people, we want, the whole point is obviously.
Right, obviously.
But I will tell you, there's a category, so I mentioned the field trip, I mentioned the job. And then there's the category. I mean, are you a social worker?
I am.
Yes. So you know what it's like. It's like, we all have our weird hangups, but I mean, people where it's like, yeah, it happened 20 years ago, but it makes them feel like they really can move on with their lives because of the confidence and all the rest of it. But there's another category that is the person who is retired, who is truly elderly. And I've heard this more than once. They just want to die with a clean record. I mean, I've literally heard that. And I've helped someone who their record was so old, the court didn't even really have the record. And it's still, he said, I still want to get it expunged. I'm like, it's very hard because it doesn't really exist. So I think that's another category that sometimes gets overlooked when we're looking at how we're going to help people.
Yeah. Well, I know on a couple of occasions this committee has allowed people to testify anonymously, but I do think sometimes we miss the ability to actually hear.
Yeah.
Because I understand the whole point is that people don't know about it, so why don't we go on the record and make people aware of it? But I do think it's important for us to understand the real life impact that it has for people, if possible.
I mean, would it be at all useful to have someone like Jenna's Promise, so they themselves wouldn't be in that category, but to say we've worked with clients who tell us this? I know it's not like the direct person, but because we can certainly, we've now, like I said, we've mastered our expungement clinic system, and now what we try to do is partner with a local agency. So we've done Jenna's Promise, we've done the Good Samaritan House in St. Albans, so they might be able to sort of, have a testimonial witness saying, I've seen how this has impacted people. So those would be two that I would say would be, good to reach out to, and might be able to speak more specifically to the impact that having a sealed or expunged record would have on their clients. Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah, I'm always happy to have people come in and testify. I don't know that necessarily the value of sealing is being called into question.
It's true.
By the committee. I don't want to speak for everybody, but I feel like there's a general consensus that having records sealed or expunged for the purpose of somebody 15 years later being able to get a job and having a clean slate. I think there's general consensus there, but yeah. So.
And I think that just a few other things we need to work out. I don't think anybody here wants to hold people up for good jobs, good housing, so on and so forth. That we're at the point where we all can see the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
Coming up with that compromise that works for all of us, something the governor will sign.
Yep.
We all have our own opinions on what should be in there, but if he's not going to sign it, he ain't going to send it good.
Yep, I agree. So we don't want to waste our time, if there's a compromise, let's do it, but we don't want to waste anyone's time either, so.
I had one more question, but were you like to say something?
I was, and it was to your point, I don't think it's hearing from people just the value of healing, but also some weigh in on their understanding of, because one of the things that as I pointed out to you, the testimony so far has been very prosecutorial heavy and not as much, representing the people who actually would be having their records expunged. And what we're talking about is who can see what. And I think it would be really helpful to get a sense from people what their understanding of what is currently done, because I've also raised the point a couple of times about the confusion of you can tell these people you don't have a record, but not these people. And so I think we're debating taking some protections away from people with moving to sealing and making that what would have previously been non-existent available to certain people. And I'd like to hear from the people it would impact. And maybe we can't. Maybe this is an instance where we can't actually hear that. But so it's not entirely about is this valuable, but somewhat about what are the changes where contemplating here.
In my experience, I don't think a lot of people even realize the difference between expungement and sealing. Like, we all realize it, you know, the professionals are realizing it, but you know, to them, they just want to be able to say, I don't have a record. So that if that's any help, probably not, because that's just me, my observation, but I don't think that a lot of them get the difference between the two.
I think, the point is well taken, but I think also just to note, you know, the Defender General and multiple defense attorneys have been reached out to and they haven't had
Yes.
the opportunity to test. They haven't had the time. Hopefully we can get them in next week, but you know, just in my own experience, surprisingly, one of the biggest things that my colleagues on the defense bar have said to me is we need to fix sealing and expungement because expungement has actually been a lot more harmful for defendants than people realize, even though it is well intentioned. I mean, when I was working on the bill in 2019, I was all for expungement and the complete destruction of the record. Now, with where I am, I'm realizing how that's actually impacting litigation and the discovery process, and where state law is butting heads with the requirements of disclosing Brady letters and so on. So there's just a lot of moving parts to it.
Yeah, it has been bumpy. I mean, I've also heard of examples where, you know, a witness might not be forthright about the history that they have, and here the prosecutor knows in their head this happened, but the records are gone, so he can't say, you know, or she can't say, this is what happened. In our office, we of course, like I said earlier, we defend the state when the state is sued. And sometimes having a record if someone who had been just as involved to sue the state, having the actual record of what that case was is helpful to us when we're preparing the defense to say, here's what actually happened. It's not just he said, she said, we have the records. To not have the records, you know, that's just another area where kind of like an unintended consequence. So moving to a ceiling by and large, is, I think, the way to go. But I do appreciate Senator Vidlowski's point that there are a couple of categories where it just seems like, really? So we should look at that and just see if it's even possible. The judiciary might say, absolutely not. Like, we have to go to this streamlined system because it's so cumbersome. It is so cumbersome. I'll give you an example. We have had 10 rounds on, you don't have to file a fee when you try to seal or expunge a record, except in one instance when you have a DUI sealing. It's a different statute. It's $90. But if you are under 25, you don't have to pay. And we explored this with the judiciary because they were like, it was not uniform throughout the courts. And then they agreed, you're right. And we just had an example, I think it was in the October clinic, where the court we were in was like, no, you have to pay $90. Like, no, it's under 25. And I had to once again go back to the judiciary. It's just like unnecessarily complicated, and slowed that down. I don't remember how we had to resolve it, but someone had to go back to the court and refile, like, yep, we don't need the $90. So it was kind of an unnecessary step that we've learned in the process since passing that law that there's probably a better way. So I love that there's a kind of can-do attitude. I do feel like we are very, very close. Yes, we are very, very close. It's just a matter of working out these little things. So, cool. Well, we will look for future testimony. We will try to get some clarity on compromises, mindful that we would love the governor to be able to feel comfortable signing this, and we'll circle back.
Great, thank you.
All right.
Actually, committee, any closing thoughts or questions? Great,
All
thank
right.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One time again. What's up?
I know that I was here to talk about stealing because that was the theme, but we do have a couple more asks of this committee. So at some point, the domestic violence fatality review report is out with recommendations. I would love to talk about that. And then the hate crime bill.
Oh yeah, so the hate crime bill, we were going to start that here, and then I had some conversations and it made sense for it to start in the House.
Okay.
And we're starting with the after hours sexual assault, lead from abuse order. That's what it's called. I can't remember off the top of my head. But either way, so it's that bill I think is going to be voted out soon. and the hate crime bill is in the House. The House is going to let us know if they're not going to be able to get to it,
Okay,
in which case we'll be able to revisit it down here.
okay, perfect.
I actually would really appreciate if the Attorney General could come in and go over the domestic violence review report.
Yeah.
I've raised a couple questions that I'm told are found in that report in a couple of our different hearings. So I'd really love it if actually you could come in and go over that in a little bit of detail.
We were trying to find some time for next week to fill in stuff, so.
Yeah,
if you want
I'd love to
reach out
come.
Kayla, and
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, we're policymakers, we're always trying to address all the issues, and domestic violence, it's like always there. And we have this past year that we reviewed, which was 2023, there were percentage wise many fewer fatalities related to domestic violence, in part because there were so many more fatalities, and they were like drug related or whatever. But it's the same number of people. It's always around, 7 to 10 people are murdered in relation every year. And imagine if we could be more effective at addressing that, which is why this statute was created 23 years ago or whatever. So I would love to come in and walk you through it. It's really, they do such a good job. It's so well written and well organized. So they use the same kind of model every year, and it's just like, it makes it really easy to they provide the context, and then here's the recommendations, and it's really well done. I mean, I obviously reviewed it, but it wasn't drafted initially by me, and it's just really well done. So I hope that there's some progress made on some of those recommendations. I think it's Chief Burke from South Burlington, who is the designee of the police law enforcement. He's so great, and if you decide to take some time,
I would like to.
because it's nice to get the different voices, and there's also a judge who sits on there. I can't remember her name, but she's also really great.
Judge Good.
She's really great, very devoted to the issue, but there's just a lot of people who are very invested and just do great work on the issue. So
Yeah, no, I would really welcome a dive with some of the players. I think the network might also
Oh,
have
yeah.
some way in, of
Well,
course,
I mean-
because we're talking about public safety so frequently. And
Right.
part of the conversation, I think, is really critically important that we should spend a bit of a deep dive on.
yeah, I mean, the network, they're always here, and it's like we forget that there's so many other players who are
Yes.
really invested. But yeah, that's awesome. I was kind of.
I think next Friday is pretty open, but Kayla is the master of the schedule. So
Friday is the best for me, but if that's when you need me, I can switch some stuff. Oh wait, I didn't bring that list.
we can,
Like my load, and I brought my other phone.
it'll be a work in progress, but we can definitely find that time.
All right, I'd love to come in. That's great. I hope you guys are having fun. It's a kind of a wild week for me. That's why I'm wearing my glasses, because I ran out of lens solution, and I'm like, I have to wear my glasses today.
It has been a wild week.
It's been a wild
We
week.
can go offline.
Oh, but it's always nice to be in this room. Also, when it's like 70 degrees and not when